So we're now just days away from one of the most important deadlines of Mark Carney's short, but already, in my opinion, disastrous tenure as Prime Minister. August the 1st. That's the date that he circled, underlined, and sold to Canadians as the target for a new trade deal with the United States. It's deadline number 4, but who's counting? And once again, we're hearing the same tired line from his government. We're hopeful. Dominic LeBlanc, one of Carney's right-hand men, says that there's hope. Meanwhile, across the border, U.S. Republican representatives are saying what everyone in Washington already knows, and kind of the rest of Canada knows too. There's no deal coming August 1st. No hope, not even a glimmer. And so the world is kind of moving on, kind of shrugging off Mark Carney. Because while Canada stalls, the United States is signing trade deals elsewhere. Not just talk, actual agreements with Japan, with the UK, and guess what? Every single one of them includes tariffs. Pretty big ones, too, in some cases. So now we have to ask, what kind of deal would be a success for Canada? And what would be a humiliating failure for Mark Carney and his team of economic elites? Let's get started and break this down. Let's go.
Welcome to Bakes on Things.
It's called the largest trade deal in history by President Trump, who is talking about the agreement made with Japan earlier today. After weeks of negotiations, it is the most significant deal so far to come ahead of the August 1st deadline. That is the time when steep tariffs will come into effect for countries who have yet to broker a deal with the United States on trade. So President Trump says under the deal, Japanese goods will now be facing tariffs of some 15%. That's instead of the 25% tariff the president did threaten Japan with earlier. He also says that they have agreed that there'll be an investment at his direction of this much, $550 billion into the US economy. As well as that, Japan will open up its market to the US, goods including cars and rice and other agricultural products. Well, let's discuss all of this with Jasper Cole, who is the expert director at Monex Group Japan. Jasper, lovely to see you. So what's your thinking on this deal? President Trump says it's a win-win, is it?
It looks very much like a win-win from Japan's perspective. Obviously 15% tariff is way better than 25%. Most importantly, for the car industry, the threat was actually 32%. So going from 32 to 15 for the car industry is a very good deal. And also, President Trump now sort of shows his generosity towards what is, after all, America's most important ally here in Asia Pacific. So it's a win-win.
Welcome back to Bakes on Things. I'm Chris Baker. It's Friday. Hey, we got to dig into all these trade deals that are getting done with the U.S. because none of them are Canadian, so might as well look at the other ones. And just this week, the United States finalized a trade agreement with Japan that includes tariffs of up to 15% on certain categories of goods. Now, this is not a free trade agreement. We know this. This is not a no tariff partnership, and we know Canada's not going to get one either. This is the new reality under President Donald Trump. If you want access to the American market, you're going to pay for that access. And Mark Carney told us as much, so I'll give him that. This Japan deal covers goods like semiconductors, vehicle components, and agriculture exports. Japan agreed to the tariffs because they wanted certainty in this deal. They wanted access to the market, and they wanted to avoid the bigger stick Trump was about to swing, which he's swinging for other nations on August 1st. So they took the deal, tariffs and all. Now, this is the same story with the UK, which reached an agreement long ago with the US, at least in principle, to look at and familiarize itself and complete a deal. That was all done earlier this year. It's not a zero tariff deal either, though. It includes tariffs, clauses on digital services, and side deals related to national security. And let's not forget that both Japan and the UK still have working trade offices filled with real negotiators, not diversity consultants and climate advisors pretending to understand global economics. And that's where we're running into a major problem. It's why all of the deadlines are getting pushed and pushed and pushed. We can't seem to work with the US on any of this. So here's what Mark Carney's really signaling and why it's dangerous. Because here is that kicker. Mark Carney has already said Canadians should expect tariffs, and no one's surprised. All the other deals have them too. And we should expect them in any final deal with the US. He's trying to frame it as inevitable, and that's fine, as if we should be grateful for whatever we get. But remember, it's the amount of tariffs that are going to matter here. This is the guy who campaigned as a master of economics, a former central banker, a global negotiator with deep ties to both Wall Street and European elites. In fairness, he actually thought he could get rid of tariffs altogether. Fail. He promised Canadians his unique blend of pedigree and poise would deliver results that populists like Pierre Poilievre or hotheads like Donald Trump never could. Well, let's look at the scoreboard. And we're going to really take a deeper look on Saturday into the scoreboard. You're going to like that. But right now, it's just about trade with the U.S. And under Carney, we missed the original July 21st deadline and some weaker deadlines proposed before that for a new agreement. And we've already given up our leverage by rescinding the digital services tax, the very tax the Liberals claimed they'd stand by to show strength against Donald Trump. And we've got no timeline and no structure, and apparently no American counterpart willing to negotiate in good faith with us because we think a deal's about to get done on August 1st, and Republican senators and others do not even see a sniff of it. And now Carney's softening us up for tariffs as if, be ready, folks, here they come. Well, that's not really leadership. That's just damage control dressed up as in a tailored suit in a G7 soundbite. What would a successful deal actually look like for Canada? If Mark Carney could actually pull this off, what should we be looking for? What would we call a success, since we know tariffs are inevitable? Well, let's be clear. Trade deals with the U.S. would have to include tariff-free access to key sectors. Not all sectors, key sectors like forestry, automotive, agriculture, and energy. There should be no tariffs there. This is critical because these are the lifeblood of Canada's export economy. When tariffs are applied to lumber, beef, grain, or cars, it becomes more expensive for U.S. companies and consumers to buy Canadian products. And that means less demand, lower revenue for Canadian companies, and eventually job losses in mills, farms, factories, and refineries across the country. A good deal keeps our products competitive and affordable in the American market, where 75% of our exports already go. Let's face it, elbows up crowd, you're not getting rid of exports to the U.S. Digital tax carve-outs could be a part of it too, and should be, or some form of recognition that Canadian digital sovereignty matters too. Canada's attempt to introduce a digital service tax was designed to ensure that global tech giants like Google, Amazon, Meta all pay their fair share when they profit from Canadian users and business. There should be some kind of carve-out for some of that. I don't agree with the actual full digital services tax or how it was presented, but some kind of protection. The U.S. could impose retaliatory tariffs or force Canada to abandon the tax altogether, and that's okay. That would leave Canadian companies, though, and content creators at a pretty big disadvantage in their own market, while foreign tech giants rake in billions untaxed. But again, that's why I feel like there should be something there as a success factor. A successful deal really goes on the right tax for digital space in our national interests. So that's really where we need to focus there, is if there has to be a tax. Streamline rules of origin, clauses that don't cripple small and mid-sized manufacturers with red tape. This is really key. Rules of origin define how much of a product must be made in a specific country to qualify for tariff-free treatment. If these rules are too strict or too complex, smaller Canadian manufacturers might get excluded here. They might get penalized, or they might just get buried in paperwork. And that means higher costs, less trade, and shrinking profits for Canadian businesses that can't afford legal departments or compliance teams. A good deal would simplify these rules and allow our manufacturers to keep competing on fair terms. And that's going to have to be a big key to this deal. No Buy American punishments that lock Canadian suppliers right out of the U.S. infrastructure projects. If we do that, we don't get a good deal. Buy American policies force U.S. contractors to use only American materials and services, even if Canadian alternatives are cheaper or, in fact, better. That effectively shuts Canadian companies right out of huge U.S. infrastructure investments in roads, bridges, and energy projects. A successful deal would exempt Canadian suppliers from these restrictions, or at the very least ensure that they can bid fairly on them. If we can't access these projects, it's not just a lost opportunity, it's a deliberate economic wall built right up against Canada. And that's not fair to us, and that would not be a good part of an agreement. We also need a clear dispute resolution mechanism. Donald Trump has shown that he's hard to deal with. And so without a binding dispute resolution process, any disagreement on tariffs, subsidies, or regulations can drag on for years, with Canada always at the mercy of the U.S. trade courts or political agendas, depending on who's in power. Remember softwood lumber? I think we all remember softwood lumber. We've been fighting that one for 40 years. A strong, enforceable resolution mechanism means Canada doesn't have to beg or wait. It means our exporters have confidence, and it means disputes get handled professionally and not politically. It is not a successful deal without that dispute resolution process involved. So watch for that. So what would a failed deal look like then? That's probably what you're asking me, and so let's get into it. Here's what I think a total failure would look like. And unfortunately, this seems to be kind of where we're heading. So tariffs of 5 to 15% or more on critical exports like softwood lumber, beef, and auto parts would be a failure. This would directly increase the cost of Canadian goods in the US, making us less competitive. And for every 5% in tariffs, did you know this? If for every 5% in tariffs, a Canadian sawmill or cattle operation loses contracts to American competitors. So that translates to layoffs, bankruptcies, and rural economic collapse in places like Northern Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia. We've already lost too many mills and too many farms. We cannot afford to be priced out of our most important markets. And so any of those tariffs would be a problem. Also, no protections or exemptions for Canadian content rules in media and digital platforms. If the US forces Canada to weaken our Canadian content laws under the guise of non-discrimination, which is something we have heard they are pushing for, then Canadian creators, broadcasters, and musicians could be flooded with American content and pushed out of their own platforms by US content algorithms. That's not just an economic loss in Canada, it's a cultural one. A failed deal would mean Canadian identity gets sacrificed at the altar of corporate globalism. And we really need to be careful there because Mark Carney loves corporate globalism. And we'd be left watching more Netflix originals than actual Canadian stories. And no progress on resolving long-standing issues like milk quotas would be an epic failure. Or even pharmaceutical patents. Most of us aren't even talking about this. Canada has held firm on protecting supply-managed sectors like dairy and on keeping prescription drug prices in check. A bad deal would either ignore these entirely, or worse, it would open them up for attack. If our milk quota system is dismantled, thousands of family farms could disappear entirely. If U.S. pharma companies gain patent control, it could drive drug prices up for Canadian seniors. Low-income families would also feel that pain, and public health budgets would be disastrous. So a deal that looks more like an ultimatum would be the biggest problem here. The whole sign here or face 25% across the board. We're already getting this rhetoric we have since the beginning of Trump's new term. This would be less negotiation then and more just extortion. It would show that Canada has lost its standing and that Carney has no strategy beyond surrender. An ultimatum deal would be designed entirely on U.S. terms without Canadian priorities represented. And really, August 1st is an ultimatum deal. And Carney would be left holding a press conference, spinning it again as a diplomatic breakthrough while the economy bleeds itself out in front of your children because they're not going to have a future. A deal with built-in expiration timelines that force Canada back to the table every 2 years would be a giant additional problem. This would keep us in a permanent state of trade insecurity. Businesses wouldn't be able to plan long-term. Investors would hold back, and Canada would always be in a defensive crouch, terrified of the next White House tantrum. This kind of unstable agreement benefits one person only, the person at the head of the stronger negotiating table. And that's not Mark Carney, my friends. It hasn't been from day one. So that's a problem. So let's look at which outcome of the two I've just presented is more likely and why. Because this is the key here. Because if we're being honest with ourselves, Canada, which version of this trade deal are we most likely to get? Well, it's not probably the success story I shared a few minutes ago. Not under this government. Mark Carney has shown no willingness to play hardball. He's surrendered on the digital tax. He missed every self-imposed deadline, and he's surrounded by a team more interested in photo ops, climate language, and of course, elite consensus than standing up for Canadians' jobs. So it's unlikely we're going to see deal number one, which means we're likely to see deal number two. And Donald Trump, on the other hand, is negotiating from a position of absolute strength. He knows Canada needs this deal more than he does. It's just the truth. He knows the Liberals are desperate for a win here. And he knows that Carney doesn't want to ruffle feathers, because ruffling feathers is how you lose invitations to Davos and the Aspen Institute. So that's probably not going to happen. So if you ask me, what do we expect is coming on August 1st, or more likely even later than that? Well, we're most likely to get tariffs, and lots of them. Mark Carney wasn't just warning us about 15% tariffs like Japan got. I would expect 20, 25, maybe even 30. We're more likely to get a take it or leave it type agreement drafted by Washington and rubber stamped by Ottawa. And we're more likely to see Mark Carney spin this as a balanced outcome that he thinks is best for Canada, when in reality, it's a total economic capitulation. Watch for each point in this agreement that we've discussed on this episode today. Come back to this episode when the agreement is signed, and you'll see which one we probably got. Because Canada deserves better than this, folks. We deserve leadership that doesn't confuse economic theory with real-world impact. We deserve a government that's willing to stand up for Canadian workers, Canadian exporters, and Canadian sovereignty. And we deserve someone who will actually fight for this country, not manage its decline. And that's what we're seeing right now. If we walk into this next trade deal with the same soft elbows that we're seeing right now, the same polished PR spin of Mark Carney, and the same tone-deaf detachment from real life that has defined the Carney government so far, then let's be honest with ourselves. We are going to get steamrolled. So, to the people of Canada, to those of you who are watching this, start paying attention to what this deal is going to look like. Start asking questions, because it's not going to go much past August 1st, I can tell you that. But come August 1st, demand the truth about what's really in this deal. Because if tariffs are coming, you better believe they're not hitting Mark Carney's estate in Ottawa. They're hitting your home, on your street. They're hitting your farm, your factory, your family. Don't let them lie about it again. We'll see you tomorrow.